to our channel, where we set out to explore wonderful, great works of literature.
While dressed in elegant clothing,
Because
because
why the hell not? So it's been a while. I feel like this is kind of like a routine where we always just say it's been a while since
And
we
then,
make
yeah.
by the time we make a new video.
And then our excuses just seem to get bigger and bigger. But this time, we really do have a legitimate excuse. I was in a serious car accident, and I've been recovering. So, really, it was truly a good excuse, and I wasn't able to really participate. So, I'm happy to be here, and hopefully, we'll be able to communicate as clearly as normally.
Yeah,
But bear with me if
possible.
there's some pauses or edits, because sometimes words don't come out as smoothly since my accident.
Yeah, and so prior to the accident and then post-accident, we were able to do a little bit of reading, and we have some material to review with you today. Never mind the thunderstorm looming ahead. There's a lot of rumblings and lightnings actually I can see in the corner of my eye. So despite the summery dress and attire and subject matter, I feel like it might get rather wet soon. So,
but you know what?
Yeah.
Our theme is kind of like explorers, so
and adventurers.
And so they probably had to endure a few storms on their voyages.
Much more travails.
And we're kind of in like a tent here, so it's our ambiance, our environment is very fitting for the book.
Absolutely, absolutely. So while we're here ensconced in rather cozy environs, we can talk about very adventurous things. So today we'll start with this excellent work by Captain Sir Richard Francis Burton. Not necessarily by him, I should say. It's a biography of him. It's probably one of the most exciting biographies I've ever read. This is Sir Richard Francis Burton. Of course, was an Englishman, and he was the son of a lieutenant, and he is well known for being the author of the translator of the Arabian Nights. And we have a wonderful edition here that you can see. This is an excellent collection of his notes and his translation, which is pretty much considered universal now. It's considered one of the best translations.
And one of the coolest parts of this book is that there's little
at the end, there's notes from all the different translators of the work, from all the famous translators. So you can see what their contributions were to some of the etymology and the history. And so he was very well versed in Arabic and Indian and African sort of lore, customs, culture. And he was such a tremendous traveler.
Sorry, we just barely escaped the storm.
Yeah, it was really bad.
Our tent almost blew over.
Yeah,
so,
no, we
bear
almost
with
blew
us
with
with
it.
the environment change.
Yeah, so
Scene change.
We're nice and dry inside now, so we couldn't endure it for very long. But for someone who could endure it, it was definitely Richard Burton.
Yes.
I guess what I wanted to say, just to recapitulate, so 1821 he was born in England, in Torquay, actually in Devon specifically, in 1821, and he died in 1890. So pretty much throughout the entire Victorian sort of era, he was very active. He was a crazy adventurer. He translated all of these very ancient tales across Africa, Arabia. Where else did he go? He went to even North America as well at certain times. So he did a wonderful sort of adventures throughout his lifetime. And of course, like I mentioned, he published the Arabian Nights. His translation is considered the best translation, the most accurate translation. And I believe in this book it's about 67 or so of the tales out of 1,001 nights from Scheherazade.
And how many have you read now?
Maybe like 3 or 4. They're wonderful. They're so fun. They're really interconnected. That's what I found very interesting. I never knew that about the 1,001 tales. Sometimes it's like a story within a story within a story. So you have multiple characters at multiple levels, and then sometimes it'll just jump back to the original story of the actual person telling it. So it's really, really fascinating. But if you actually read the entirety of the Arabian Nights, it's 10 volumes. It's published in 10 volumes. So it's a tremendous work. The best, they consider the best selection are the ones that are published by Eastern Press here, which is wonderful. I think it's well worth the money as well. But yeah, going back to Sir Richard Francis Burton, I'm always confusing him with Robert Burton, who was like he was much older time period. He wrote sort of Melancholia, sort of like Reflections on Melancholia. Anyway, completely different. But yeah, so did you take anything from his life that you found particularly like inspiring?
Um, that's a really good question. I think one thing, I don't know if I took a lot from it, but I think one thing that resonated with me was he did all these amazing things around the world, accomplished so many feats for the time.
Was able to speak 29 different
29
languages and
different
dialects.
languages, was one of the first Europeans to travel disguised as an Arabic person quite successfully, even though he was European. He
Converted to Islam.
did eventually, actually, because of his travels, convert to Islam.
Became a Sufi.
And he discovered quite a few different regions and in throughout the Middle East, and yet he wasn't really given a lot of recognition at the time, and it's because of his mouth. Like he really believed in the causes a lot of the times that he was promoting, and because he lived with people, with the people, with the land, he often sided against what the government at the time was trying to achieve, and
colonial powers, right?
had no problem calling out other people who were claiming to have certain titles or feats or and so in doing so he kind of shot himself in his own foot, and
so for most of his life he worked for John Company, which is known colloquially as the John Company, which is the East India Company. And so he was always considered sort of like an officer within that company, to somehow get the lay of the land, to meet the population, to get a sense of the geography, the economy. And his notes are copious. Copious notes from flora and fauna, geographical landscape, the culture, the traditions, the languages, and he was well versed in all of it. Almost he had like an encyclopedic knowledge of the areas that he traveled in, and the areas that he traveled in were incredibly vast. So he went to the heart of Africa. You were mentioning before we were at the Russian side that he was locating the
source
of the Nile, which was a big thing.
And he was very close to finding it, and he debated the man who claimed to find the source of the Nile. He kind of debated that it truly wasn't, and so because of a lot of his confrontations and his maybe not so couth way of calling out people, he had a lot of enemies.
Who hindered his success?
Yeah, financial success as well. But he was a very ambitious man. Like even until for that time, what year was like his peak of his adventures?
1860s.
1850s. So for that time, like he lived a pretty long life and still had pretty remarkable adventures up into his mid 60s, right? But yeah, on very little income to provide for his family in the end, because of this kind of confrontation. So I guess what I learned is that be careful who you make enemies with, and perhaps there's a way. Perhaps there's a way to, just if you, unfortunately, sometimes in life it's like this decision of trying to protect people and protect what you believe in at your own cost.
And choosing your battles wisely, I suppose, right?
That's what I learned in answer to your question.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair assessment. I really like that. Yeah, and so I think maybe the height of his career, he was the first Westerner to enter Mecca, and to kind of like be sort of initiated into a Sufi brotherhood as well. And he was also part of some espionage, sort of suspicions of espionage during the Great Game. So that was what was happening during this time as well. And and then eventually him and his wife, who was a Roman Catholic, a devout Roman Catholic, they ended up becoming sort of like the local authority, heading the local authority in Damascus, and so they met a lot of foreign dignitaries. They were quite well known. They made good friends of Abdallah, Kabir. So there was so many interesting personas, people that they met, places that they went together. She would even join him, and there was something almost like gypsy-like about him. She said like there was an attractiveness to him, a wildness, almost like a little bit of like sort of a devilishness to Burton. He was quite a magnetic figure.
Yeah, and I mean, they start out by painting a picture of him as kind of being so. As a young kid, he was getting into fights and like lived. Where was he living in when he was brought up?
He was in Brittany as well. Like he was in parts of France,
and often was like playing with Romani. So he kind of had this rough and tumble way about him, and that part of him, that adventurous and also like daring and brave man, never really seemed to, or boy, just grew up into a brave and adventurous man.
Incredibly prolific. Like he wrote books on top of books on top of books, which were not very necessarily successful at the time. Like he wrote a book on falconry.
Yep.
He wrote a book on sorting.
On the Kama Sutra.
The Kama Sutra on sorting.
One of the first ones, actually, this was really one thing I found really fascinating about him was that he really vocalized about European women should actually enjoy sex. Like he was very outspoken about that sex should be enjoyed by both genders, not just one or the other, and that was really taboo at the time. To bring in the erotic, I guess. But not from a like perverted sense, but from a mystical and
spiritual sense as well.
Yeah, but also as a even on the other side as scientific too, because he talked a lot about like genitalia, like the circumcision of females.
He was very much against female circumcision.
Yeah, and he just talked about all those different cultural things. So he had so many different, I guess, parts to his personality. It wasn't like his mission was just to talk about mystical things or religious things. He talked about the scientific components of it. He actually geographically discovered a lot of things. Language-wise, he learned a lot of different dialects that people probably didn't even know existed at the time.
Exactly.
So he was pretty, I think prolific in a sense of like so wide in what he was able to learn and achieve, rather than just one focal kind of adventure. He literally was an adventure of so many fields. What did you find the most remarkable about?
I don't know. I sometimes wish I sometimes feel I have a wasted life in a way that like I wish I had sort of the ability to absorb languages like he did. And it makes you think, if ever you're discouraged from learning a new language and you think you're not making progress, and how do other people pick up so many languages? Obviously the more you know, the easier the other ones come in. But he would study like Persian for like 16 hours a day, 16 hours in a 24-hour day. So like it's kind of redonkulous. But one thing I did want to mention is one of the reasons for his lack of success in the publishing world was he was always writing about things that were just falling out of fashion. Like even his sorting, the idea of fencing and sorting, he was like a master swordsman. Even in the tribes in Arabia, he was able to hold his own, and people were impressed with his skill with the sword. But at that point, the gun and the pistol were like kind of being used, and the rifle, and like technologically much more sound, I guess. But he writes with such romantic passion for like just the romanticism, where he just defends the sword and the saber as the right arm of justice in your heart, and he infuses it with so much romantic sort of ideas and imagery that you're just like, no, let's root for this guy. This guy knows what he's talking about. There's something that's missing through the technological advancement. But we can get actually that later when we go into the next book. So let's see what have you been reading?
Okay, so we read some of them together. We read it together
as well.
But this was called Ladies of the Field, on early women archaeologists.
Show them.
So what's really amazing about this book is that it's covers the journey of quite a few
7
females who were introduced to archaeology and really became really prolific in the field. So there was Amelia Edwards, who was born in 1831 and died in 1892, Jane Dieulafoy, 1851 to 1916, Zelia Nuttall, died in 1933, Gertrude Bell, who died in 1926, Harriet Boyd Hawes, Agatha Christie, Dorothy Garrod, who died in 1968. So So it follows all of these women's lives, and it has great pictures along the way of some of the characters, which I love to really bring them to life.
Yeah.
And so each of them kind of has a really kind of establishes archaeology in their own way in the field, and it's really interesting to see how archaeology as a science really develops. And so, for example, Amelia Edwards was really one of the first pioneers in archaeology, and she really romanticized archaeology. She was a romance author of quite significant wealth, and she just happened to be traveling there. But rather than just writing, she actually came across a dig and ended up falling in love with it and engaging in her own archaeological digs in Egypt. She had also studied hieroglyphs as well.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and Jane de la Foy, hopefully I'm pronouncing that okay.
She was French.
She was French. And she is often known as being a woman, one of the first women to dress as a male, but her story is so much more profound and significant than that. She's quite remarkable. She ended up actually fighting in the Prussian War in 1870 alongside her husband. So she chose her husband. She came from, again, more of an upper class, well-educated family. And rather than choosing just a man for kind of what they could offer financially, she definitely chose a partner who would go on adventures with her. His name was Marcel. And together she fought with right beside him. So rather than just being, I shouldn't say just being, but rather than being separate and being a nurse, which was very common at the time for women.
She dressed like a man.
She literally dressed as a man and pretended she was a man, so that she could fight alongside her husband.
And she was an amazing markswoman. She was a sniper.
Yeah, she was a sniper.
That's pretty cool.
And so then she followed her husband throughout Persia, especially, and
on digs.
Yeah, and on digs, she wrote quite a few, I guess, books and lectures and articles on a lot of the finds that they found, including she actually found this lion frieze of Susa, it's called, and you can actually still see it today at the Louvre in France. So that's pretty neat. And Zelia Nettel is a Mexican archaeologist, and she was pretty neat. She again really preserved a lot of Mexican culture, and
specifically the Aztecs, right?
Yeah, specifically the Aztecs, and she brought back to life a lot of rituals to the Mexican people, and ended up helping a lot with I guess safekeeping a lot of Mexican art in the University of California. And she was really interesting because she married quite young. It was not a happy marriage. She divorced and had a child. And, it was just, she took full custody of her child at the time, and still was quite remarkable in the field of archaeology. Although she still, obviously, for the time, had a lot of issues with getting proper notoriety.
Yeah.
Thank you. Notoriety for her work, and so there's some interesting tales about how she kind of had to overcome that. There's Gertrude Bell.
Very famous.
Gertrude Bell,
very well known.
Again, did many digs in Persia, Iraq, and Mesopotamia.
The Queen of the Desert, she was known as.
Yes. And she established many permits and protection of artifacts in Iraq, especially. And so at the time, if you kind of watch some of those old films, and it really was like, up until her time, it was kind of a free-for-all. Whoever got there, found the booty, would be able to sell it. There was no protection of the artifacts, and so whether it was thieves or a lot of the artifacts would go missing, or even on a dig, a lot of times the artifacts would be stolen
and sold on the black market.
Yeah. So she actually made a lot of permits to if it was private land, not just anyone could go and dig on it. So protected a lot of Iraq people's own land and property
and cultural heritage.
Yeah, and cultural heritage. She established a museum and helped I guess make those artifacts part of the property of Iraq people, which is really interesting.
And then the most famous.
Yeah, the most famous is Agatha Christie. So her her story is really interesting. You know, she's quite the character. A lot of these women, they were very romantic, and you know, when they come back to their countries with stories, it romanticized the world of archaeology. But again, she was quite remarkable. What are some things you remember to give me a break from talking about her?
Yeah.
What did you find particularly?
Well, it was just on the notion of romanticism. I think it was fascinating because this book actually shows sort of the marked transition between the romanticism of archaeology and uncovering history and all these old civilizations that are nearly forgotten, right, or being rescued and brought to the sort of the mind's eye in the present, and how it sort of transforms into a science. It becomes very sort of empirically based. It becomes very much like methodologically based.
That wasn't so much Agatha Christie, though.
It wasn't Agatha Christie so much.
That was more Dorothy Garrod.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
during
Dorothy
her time,
Garrod was the one she was the first female, sorry, I'm wiggling the table. She was the first female professor of archaeology at Cambridge. Yeah. And so she had a very dry,
academic
very reserved,
approach, scholarly,
scientific approach, and both her two brothers and father died within the same year or something like that. And so she
during the war,
and
I think
he was he was a prolific like scientist, so she had big shoes to fill. So she made things like moved it really into the scientific a scientific field, whereas before people kind of scoffed at it. And she studied like Homo sapiens and the evolution of humans.
Yeah.
So she actually dug like human bodies, and
almost like Neolithic period.
Yeah, exactly.
Earlier.
Yeah. So she's the one who kind of moved it into science. Sorry, I didn't want to take it over.
No,
whereas Agatha Christie kind of was still on that bandwagon of romanticism, of making it like, I mean, she still did do digs and actually help put together pieces of artifacts herself. Yeah,
she ended up marrying like a younger man after her first divorce, and then Max, and so they would do these adventures together and go on these digs together. And Hercule Poirot, one of her most famous sort of detectives, there's I think maybe like 3 different stories, Murder on the Nile, a few other ones where it's all based in sort of like Mesopotamia or like, you know, or Egypt, and it's all about sort of murder in the Orient or something along those lines. Not the Express though, not the Orient Express.
I would say Agatha Christie was kind of the last of the like really making archaeology this adventure tale.
Captures the imagination of the people, the audience.
And then people started to, the end of her time, started to kind of get bored of archaeology, and other scientists scoffed at it. So it was really Garrod who established it as a scientific field. But what I found really kind of cool and inspiring at the end of all of it, was all of these women. There's so much more to their character than just what, I don't know, like a caricature of what we see women of the time being like. And so I found that really inspiring. And also what's really interesting is they purposely chose not to have a husband, or they purposely chose a husband who would highlight their true passions, but also their true genius. Like, a lot of these women were quite remarkable people. And, you know, really, like, for example, Jane de la Foy, their partnership was really, really a beautiful, they celebrated one another, and both elevated each other throughout their journey. And, you know, all of their adventures, like most of these women, they didn't start their real great adventures until after the age of 30. And so, you know, I think
much later in life,
like I think it was Nuttall, I think, who maybe didn't even do her first dig until she was like 56 or something like that. Like, and so we kind of have this idea of adventurous people, you know, they only get to be adventurous in their 30s, but, you know, if these women could do it in the 1800s, come on, we can do quite remarkable things even after the age of 50, right? And I think it's a great reminder to everyone that life doesn't end in your 30s, right? Like, you can do.
I should hope not for a majority of people out there. I just mean
in the sense, like, if you have an adventurous soul, you don't have to settle down and do, like, your career doesn't just simply end. Your passion doesn't have to end. You can continue. And I think, you know, we have an obsession with beauty. We have an obsession with, like, especially women, like, there's a lot of pressure for, you know, once you have your family becomes everything, even today. And that's, you know, doesn't have to be everything.
There are other ways of being in the world.
Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say. There's a mosquito.
Passion as well. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing those stories as well. Definitely worth it because it was like in short little snippets, right? Little biographical chapters.
Yeah, perfect for where my brain was at.
Yeah, a little bit different than, you know, this big compendium of his activities and accomplishments.
And you could probably write like a full book like this for each of these ladies.
I'm sure of it.
Maybe there is.
I'm sure of it.
But, you know, 2 adventurous stories.
How would you rate them out of 5?
They're just so different. Like, this is a biography. This is kind of like a mini-biography.
Yeah, mini multiple biographies. But if you were to rate it, on not as together, but
well, this
like,
one's definitely a 5 out of 5.
5 out of 5, and then this one.
It was just dense at times, I'd say, but it was really interesting. Like 4.2 out of 5. How about you?
Yeah, I would say this one was about 4.2, and I think this one was maybe like it's like a 4.4. I think it's like it's an easy read. I think my criticism is sometimes the writing's a little bit sloppy, a little bit off.
Although this is the advanced.
This is the advanced copy, so we don't know whether
uncorrected proof.
Yeah, so we don't know whether the publisher did those adjustments. But at times you could feel like, oh, she was typing on her
the edits needed to.
on her computer on Microsoft Word, and a few things needed to be corrected. But I believe the writer here, Amanda Adams, is also an archaeologist. I think she said she was an archaeologist. So it's really, really quite inspiring. It's really wonderful. And and if you get a chance, please pick up a copy of the Arabian Nights. It's well worth it. Even, I don't know, take one a day, take one a night.
Yeah, just like she did.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and you know, we hope you have a very lovely evening, and have a lovely summer.
Thanks for everyone who stayed with us despite the 6 months of really not really contributing.
Been 6 months? Gosh.
I think so. Maybe.
I hope not.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, anyway, you take care for now, and we'll see you next time, whenever that may be. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.